Hey everyone, welcome to the Jack of All page. Today we are putting Camlock washers or offset washers on my Jeep Wrangler. Some of the tools that you're going to need to do this are a 21mm wrench and ratchet with socket, maybe an impact, a Dremel or a reamer tool, some Sharpies, gloves, definitely safety glasses, anything else you need to keep the metal shavings off your skin. The reason you'll be installing these washers, if you lift your Jeep a little bit and you don't want to install extended lower control arms, maybe they're too expensive, maybe you didn't lift it very much, this just improves your caster angle a little bit, moving it back into specifications. Alright, so one of the first things you're going to need to do is get your Jeep or whatever vehicle you're doing this up in the air off the weight of the vehicle so you can work underneath it. Whether you have a lift, whether you have jacks and jack stands, whatever you need, lift the vehicle up off of the frame and take the weight off the suspension. That little light lift was just taking some of the weight of the lower axle for me while I'm working on it under a lift. Alright, so what we're looking at now is the lower control arm bolts. There are the two front ones on each side and there's the two back ones on each side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the front ones and then I'm going to loosen up the back ones on each side. This will give me a little bit of free play so I can drop the lower control arm out of my way and work on getting at the holes to make the Camlock washers fit. Alright, working on the other side now, loosening it up. Alright, so I'm grabbing a hammer. You gotta be very careful if you're gonna hammer out your bolts. You want to take the weight off as much as you can to loosen up your control arms. So as you tap out your bolts or work out your bolts, you don't actually mess up any of the threads. So when they're out, I'm gonna make sure I didn't mess up any of the threads. It's not a bad idea to get new mounting hardware, but if you don't get it, just make sure it's all good thread-wise and can go back into the knot easy. Next, I'm going to look at my actual Camlock washers. Forgive the poor viewing when you're working on a lift. Sometimes things on your head don't get a good vantage point. If you look at the actual mounting holes of the front control arm, they have two little spines that stick out on both sides that these Camlock washers are designed to fit in. So what I'm doing is I'm putting the Camlock washers up there and I'm marking the hole of where I want to ream out to. There are little indicators on there. There's little perforated like steel that you are supposed to be able to punch out with a chisel. I didn't want to risk punching out too much metal. I wanted to ream out the minimum amount of metal I could to move it the direction that I wanted to move it. So I'm just going through all the holes and marking them and getting them ready to run the actual reamer tool. The reamer tool just helps grind out some of the metal, open it up so that the offset bolt can adjust the caster in the direction that I want. It does fling a whole lot of metal, so you need to be careful with that and watch your eyes. Make sure you have either a shield on, glasses on, and you're just running the Dremel just enough to kind of enlarge that hole a little bit. I have one of my helpers back here who's holding me my tools so I can get it back and forth. I just put it up there and check it a few times to make sure that I'm grinding out the appropriate amount of metal. Don't want to lose too much. So when I finally have it, I grab 2 Camlock washers and finally put the control arm back up there, slide them in. It's important to have a good caster angle. That way when you're driving down the road, your vehicle wants to stay straight. Lifted vehicles, Jeeps with these solid axles, so on and so forth, don't always like to stay straight when they're lifted up. Throws off the angle just a little bit. So I had my pry bar brought in, so now I'm going to pry that front end up and shift it just enough to where I can position the washers in the notches correctly and tighten up the nut and bolt. I finally get the place I want. A little bit of tightening with the wrench and ratchet. Get it to where it's locked into place. Important step is to make sure you torque it down. These are supposed to be torqued at 110 foot-pounds. So make sure you get to the right setup. That way the bolts don't over tighten or under tighten and loosen up, and you can risk your control arm falling down. With all the grinding it took to get all the holes reamed out, I'd say this job took me about 30-35 minutes. I did have a few student helpers helping me line up what I needed to line up, so if you do it by yourself, account for about that much time, maybe a little bit more. When you get them all torqued down and everything's back to where it needs to go, you can work on lowering your vehicle and get ready to drive it away. Setting it off for another alignment is not a bad idea. This one will be going here shortly, just to make sure everything is back to where I need it and back to be safe to drive down the road. I thank you guys for watching the Jack of All installing these washers.